Welcome everybody, I'm Frank Clifford and this is Frank Answers presented by Astrology Hub. In this edition, I'm going to be looking at a question from Judy. And Judy writes, my natal Saturn is retrograde in Taurus in the 10th house. I'm curious about the significance of a retrograde Saturn in the natal chart and the significance of the fact that it's also on the opposite side of my chart from every other placement. So let's take a look at that and we'll look at Judy's chart. Okay, so as you can see in the chart, Saturn is in the 10th house in Taurus. It's the only planet above the horizon. And so that gives it extra prominence. Any planet that's above the horizon is seen by other people, noticeable by other people. And certainly Saturn in Taurus speaks of a need to be everybody's rock, to help people, to support people. And I found over the years that people with Saturn in Taurus often go for the mortgage early or try to set themselves up financially early, because where we have Saturn, there can be a fear. And Saturn in Taurus can be the fear of poverty, the fear of not having financial security. So Saturn's retrograde, and that's the main question from Judy. And in my experience, a natal retrograde planet is not backwards, it's not slow, it's not always simply about the inner life, as you might read in some books. Retrograde, in my experience, means second chance. Often there's an early experience of that planet, and then it's put on hold, it's subjugated. There's some sort of pause that happens. And then later on, the person is able to reconnect with that planet on a stronger level. So Saturn retrograde could be fully engaged early in life. Now, a third of you watching are going to have Saturn retrograde. And often what it means, particularly if it's dominant like it is in Judy's chart, is that we take on burdens or parental responsibilities early in life. And sometimes we have to put our own care, considerations, our own ambitions on hold for a while. And so what you find often people with Saturn retrograde is that they've taken on the role of a parent, or they've parented a parent, or there's been an absent parent and they've had to take on more adult duties at an early age. Later on, the Saturn retrograde person gets more comfortable and puts their own needs, responsibilities first and foremost, really, as a priority. Okay. You'll find this with any of the planets that are retrograde. The outer planets spend around 5 months of the year retrograde. I wouldn't, unless they were on an angle in the chart, I wouldn't prioritize a retrograde outer planet. But Mercury retrograde in the natal chart, very often linked to an early talent, an early interest that then gets put on hold and then gets rediscovered later in life. It might be an interest in writing or singing or performing, whatever the sign that the planet is in. And so we can look at all the retrograde planets to understand that the person gets to experience them a little bit early, perhaps too early, before the maturity or the self-awareness that we need to handle it is present. So this early promise is put on hold, and we often catch up with other things in our lives and then rediscover that retrograde planet. Okay, so there's a pause, a gestation period. Okay. Now, Noel Till would write a lot about Saturn retrograde, and it's an aspect he had himself. And he felt it was linked to a legacy of inferiority due to the lack of an authority figure early in childhood, or perhaps having a tyrannical figure in childhood. Noel had Saturn on the midheaven, near the midheaven in Pisces opposite Neptune. So his in particular was linked to the parental axis of the midheaven and the IC. So perhaps this is why it was so prominent in his life and why he had such a strong grasp of it. For most of us, though, it may not come out as strongly as that. Certainly, there'll be issues of having to grow up with Saturn retrograde, having to grow up early. So if we go back to Judy's chart for a moment, we see that all the 9 planets below the horizon with Saturn up there on its own. And you will find that any planet on the other side of the chart to the sun will naturally be retrograde. Any planet sort of more than sometimes a square or a trine really away from the sun is naturally going to be retrograde, except of course Mercury and Venus, which are always relatively close to the sun from our position. So it's a very dominant Saturn in the chart. It's strong and sturdy in Taurus. It's got being supportive, strong, loyal. These are traits that are going to be very important that Judy shows off in her 10th house, in her working life. And it's also going to be carrying that sense of strong responsibility. If the birth time is right, we know that the age of 30, which is the natural Saturn return at 29:30, is going to be very powerful for Judy, not only because Saturn is so dominant in her chart, but also because the midheaven is 30 degrees away from Saturn. So 29:30 is going to be a very important time for her in establishing and growing and developing that placement of Saturn in Taurus. Okay, I hope that was useful for you. I know many of you out there will have Saturn retrograde. Look at the sign it's in, but generally look at the adult responsibilities that you took on. The sign is always going to tell us what's important to us to compensate for, an area that we feel we lack something of that sign. So Saturn in Taurus is going to overcompensate for this worry or fear of poverty or fear of material insecurity in a way. All right then, okay, I'll see you all very soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.